Part 1. When the cold bites back there was so sharp it felt like it could cut you. Even standing still, I could feel the cold gnawing its way through the seams of my clothing, creeping into my bones with every breath. The thermometer back at the village had read -71°C, but out here, in the open Siberian wilderness, it felt even worse. There's no getting used to it. You don't adapt to this kind of cold, you just endure. The snow under my boots didn't crunch. It squealed, a high-pitched, brittle sound that only happens when the temperature drops so low that moisture in the air freezes. Instantly, my eyelashes were already gathering frost, tiny needles forming and melting against my skin only to freeze again moments later. The world was white and endless, no trees for shelter, no hills to block the wind, just a flat expanse that stretched toward a sky the color of old steel. The blizzard had been threatening all morning. It started as a distant haze on the horizon, a pale curtain that seemed harmless enough. But here you learn quickly that in Siberia, distance lies. What looks far away can be on top of you in minutes. The wind picked up in sudden, violent bursts, slamming into my side and almost spinning me around. Snow whipped across the ground in ghostly waves, swirling around my legs, tugging at my coat. Slipping icy fingers into my gloves, I stopped for a moment to adjust the straps on my pack. The leather was stiff with frost, and my fingers felt like someone else's, slow, unresponsive. Inside the pack was my lifeline, a small bundle of food, an axe, a sleeping bag rated for Arctic temperatures, and a roll of birch bark for starting. A fire, in these conditions, a fire isn't just warmth, it's the line between living and becoming part of the frozen landscape. The first blast of snow hit like a thrown bucket of ice. The visibility dropped so suddenly it felt like someone had pulled a curtain across my eyes. The horizon was gone. The world shrank to a circle no more than 10 meters wide. Somewhere, far off, I could hear the wind moaning across the empty plains, a deep, low sound that made my stomach twist. I pulled my fur hood tighter around my face until only a narrow slit remained for my eyes. Every part of me was covered. Yet still I could feel the cold pressing in. Walking became harder. The snow beneath my feet turned uneven, as if the wind had carved ridges and hollows in the night. Each step was a gamble. Would it be firm or would I sink to my knees? The constant strain made my thighs burn, and the heavy air made breathing feel like inhaling shards of glass. But stopping wasn't an option. In this weather, stillness is a death sentence. You have to keep moving. Keep blood pumping through your limbs, keep the fire inside your body from going out. As the storm thickened, my thoughts grew slower, heavier. I started counting steps just to keep my mind focused. 100 steps, then a pause to check direction. Another 100, then a quick sip of tea from my thermos. Though tea was generous, it was already half frozen, more like slush. Still, it gave me something warm to hold in my hands for a few seconds before the wind snatched the heat away. I thought about turning back. The village wasn't far, maybe an hour's walk in good weather, but the storm was growing faster than I had planned for. Out here, pride can get you killed. You convince yourself you can push just a little farther, and before you know it, you're too far gone to turn around. I told myself I'd find some kind of windbreak, even a low ridge or a fallen tree, and wait it out. But in the Siberian wilderness, nature doesn't care what you tell yourself. The blizzard was already closing in, erasing the landscape around me. My footprints behind me had vanished. Ahead, there was nothing but white, no sign of shelter, no sign of anything at all. The cold here isn't just a temperature, it's alive. It presses against you, whispers in your ear, promising rest if you just stop fighting it. I tightened my grip on my pack straps and pushed forward, each step heavier than the last. Somewhere ahead, I hoped there was a place to survive the night, somewhere the cold couldn't follow me. But in this frozen world, hope is as fragile as the matchsticks in my pocket, and just as easy to snuff out. Part to white out the world had vanished. There was no horizon, no up or down, only white, swirling chaos, thick as smoke, wrapping around me and swallowing sound. Even the wind had changed its voice. It no longer howled but screamed, shrill and ragged, tearing through my hood and rattling in my ears. Snowflakes the size of grains of sand stung my face like needles. I could barely see my own boots. I tried to follow the compass, but the needle quivered and swung with each gust, as if the storm itself was trying to confuse me. My gloves were clumsy, but I pulled it close to my eyes, squinting to make out the trembling red point. North, always north. But north didn't matter much now. The cold was starting to reach inside me, and that was far more dangerous than losing direction. My fingers felt stiff inside the gloves, like frozen sticks. I flexed them hard, shaking my hands to force blood back into them. The first signs of frostbite are subtle, a dull numbness, a fading of sensation, and if you don't fight it, you won't notice until your skin is white and hard out. Here, that's the first step toward losing pieces of yourself, quite literally. I thought I saw a shape ahead, a dark smear against the blizzard's wall. My pace quickened, hope fluttering weakly in my chest. Maybe a cluster of trees, maybe a hunter's shelter. But as I drew closer, the shape dissolved into nothing. Just a trick of shifting snow and desperate imagination. That's when the first spike of fear hit me. I wasn't just lost in the storm, I was disappearing inside it. The blizzard had a weight now. Each gust shoved at me with enough force to stagger my steps, and my knees began to ache from pushing forward through uneven drifts. My breath froze in my scarf so quickly that a crust of ice formed around my mouth, making it harder to draw air. Each inhale felt shallower than the last. I decided to stop for just a moment, crouching low to shield myself from the wind. I scraped at the snow with my mittens, trying to carve a shallow hollow to break the force of the gusts. It wasn't much, barely a depression in the endless white, but the difference was enough to let me think. My body was shaking now, but not from effort. Shivering is good. It means your body is still fighting. When it stops, that's when trouble begins. My mind wandered to stories I'd heard from the elders in the village, of hunters found frozen in the spring thaw, curled in the snow as if asleep, their rifles still strapped across their backs. The cold, they said, doesn't always kill with violence. Sometimes it sings you to sleep, gentle and quiet, so you never feel the end coming. I shook the thought away and forced myself to stand. I couldn't stay in that hollow. It was too exposed. Somewhere out there, there had to be cover, a ridge, a stand of larch, anything that could break the wind. I turned slightly east, choosing a direction by instinct more than reason. Then, through the blur of snow, I caught it, another dark line in the white, but this one didn't vanish as I moved. It grew clearer, the jagged edge of rock, half buried in drifts, rising from the flat plain like a frozen wave. My pulse kicked harder. If I could reach it, I could use the leeward side as shelter, but the wind was not about to let me win easily. Every step toward that ridge was a fight, the snow pulling at my legs, the gusts trying to knock me off balance. My vision tunneled, and I had to force my body to obey with each movement. The ridge was close now, maybe 50 meters, yet it felt like crossing a continent. When I finally stumbled into its shadow, the difference was immediate. The wind dropped from a scream to a muffled roar, the snow falling less violently. Here, I pressed my back against the cold stone, gulping air, feeling the ice in my scarf begin to soften just slightly from my breath. For the first time in hours, I felt like I might have a chance. But the blizzard wasn't over, and the Siberian night was still coming. And in 7-1C, night is when the real battle begins. Part 3. The battle for firelining against the frozen rock. I could feel the life slowly bleeding out of my body with each minute. The ridge gave me shelter from the worst of the wind, but shelter alone wouldn't keep me alive. In this kind of cold, you need heat, not the imagined heat of movement, but real fire. Without it, I'd be just another shape in the snow by morning. I dug into my pack, my gloves clumsy on the straps. Every motion felt slower, heavier, as if the cold had thickened time itself. My fingers brushed the small bundle of kindling I'd prepared before the trip, a mix of birch bark, dry grass, and splinters shaved from pine. Normally, it would be more than enough, but now the thought of coaxing flame from it in this storm felt almost absurd. I wedged myself tighter into the hollow at the ridge's base, using my body to block the last sneaking tendrils of wind. Then, I pulled out the matches, fat wooden ones, the kind that could burn longer than a breath. I struck one, but the wind found it instantly, snatching away the spark before it could grow. The second burned a little longer, flaring orange against the snow before sputtering into smoke. By the fifth match, my breathing had quickened, each failure stealing more than just my energy. It took hope with it. The kindling felt damp, my gloves too clumsy to handle it delicately. I knew I had to think like the old hunters had taught me. Fire is alive. You have to feed it gently, let it breathe, coax it into the world before it can stand on its own. I pulled off my right glove, baring my fingers to the air. The pain was immediate, sharp and vicious, like plunging my hand into boiling water. Only this water burned with cold. I worked fast, arranging the birch bark into a loose nest. The dry grass curled inside like a waiting heartbeat. Another match flared. I cupped it, bringing it close to the bark, shielding it with my bare hands. The flame lit the white surface, hesitating, and then the bark caught, curling black at the edges, releasing that faint sweet scent only birch can give. I fed it slivers of wood, my breath ragged, willing it to grow. For a moment, it seemed the storm itself paused, as if deciding whether to allow me this small victory. Then the flame leapt higher, orange and gold against the wall of white, and heat kissed my face for the first time in hours. I wanted to cry from relief, but I knew tears would freeze before they fell. I fed the fire greedily now, stripping more shavings from my larger logs, stacking them carefully to avoid smothering the core. The crackle was faint, but in the deafening silence of the ridge's shadow, it was the loudest, most beautiful sound I'd heard all day. I held my hands out to the flame, watching the skin flush red again as blood crept back into my fingers. It hurt, a deep, aching throb, but it was the kind of pain that meant life was returning. Still, I knew the fire was fragile. One wrong gust, one careless movement, and it would vanish. As the minutes passed, the small circle around me transformed. The snow nearest the fire darkened and softened, sending thin tendrils of steam into the air. Shadows from the flame danced across the rock, moving like restless spirits. The storm still raged beyond my tiny sanctuary, the wind's roar just meters away. But here, I had carved out a pocket of warmth in a world made of ice. I took out my last piece of dried meat, gnawed at it slowly, feeling strength seep back into my limbs. But my mind stayed sharp with the knowledge that this was only a pause. The night was coming fast, and in 7-1C, night doesn't forgive mistakes. I would have to decide soon. Keep moving toward the village or try to last the night out, here in the blizzard's grasp, somewhere deep inside. I knew both choices carried the same truth. In this place, the cold isn't just weather. It's a living thing, and it never stops hunting. Part 4. The last pushed fire was dying. Not because I'd run out of fuel. I still had a few logs, but because the storm had grown restless again, sending sharp fingers of wind curling around the ridge to snatch at the flames. Each gust flattened the fire, making it gutter and spit. I could feel the cold pressing in, greedy, like it had been watching me from the dark and waiting for its chance to reclaim me. I stared at the faint orange glow, knowing what it meant. If I stayed here until morning, I'd have to keep feeding this fire for the next 12 hours. That wasn't possible, not with my dwindling wood, not with the storm's hunger. Staying put meant surrender. I packed up quickly, shoving the last of the dried meat into my mouth and stamping out the embers. The moment the heat was gone, the cold slammed into me with a force that stole my breath. My body protested, muscles stiff from hours of stillness, but I forced myself upright. I had to move now, before I lost the will. The world outside my little hollow was worse than before. Snow flew sideways, a white wall that erased the horizon. The wind screamed in my ears, tearing at my hood, finding the gaps in my clothing like a living predator. My eyelashes froze together with every blink, forcing me to rip them apart just to see. I moved into the storm like a man wading through a nightmare, one slow step after another, boots sinking deep into drifts. Somewhere in the chaos, I could hear my own heartbeat, thudding against my skull. I didn't think about the distance. I didn't think about time. I thought only about the next step. The trail I'd been following was gone, swallowed by the blizzard. I navigated by memory and instinct, searching for the dark shapes of the tree line ahead. If I could make it there, I'd have shelter from the wind, and maybe even find the old hunter's hut I'd heard about from locals. At one point, I stumbled, falling hard onto my knees. The snow welcomed me, soft and almost warm compared to the air. The temptation to stay there was terrifying in its sweetness. I'd read about this, how hypothermia tricks you into thinking you're safe, how the cold whispers for you to rest. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself up, cursing aloud just to hear my own voice over the wind. Then a sound, not the wind, not the crunch of my own boots, a faint creak, rhythmic, familiar. I turned my head and through the swirling snow saw the outline of a structure, low, squat, and leaning against the wind. The hut. It was closer than I thought, but still far enough that the cold could claim me before I reached it. I pushed forward, every muscle screaming, each step feeling like the last one I could manage. My vision tunneled, my thoughts narrowed to the simple act of moving. When I finally reached the door, my hands barely worked. I slammed my shoulder against it, the wood groaning before giving way. Inside, the darkness was thick, but the air was still, blessedly still. My breath came ragged, and I collapsed onto the wooden floor, snow melting beneath me. It took minutes before I could move again. I fumbled for my matches, lit one, and saw the interior. Bare walls, an old stove, a stack of wood in the corner. The kind of place built for exactly this moment, when the storm outside wasn't just weather, but a thing trying to kill you. I fed the stove, watched the flames rise, felt the heat creep back into my bones. For the first time in hours, I let myself believe I'd lived through the night. Outside, the wind roared like an animal denied its prey. Inside, I closed my eyes, listening to the crackle of fire, knowing that here, in the heart of the blizzard, I had carved out a victory, small, but mined out in Yakutia. Survival isn't about beating the cold. It's about lasting just a little longer than it can wait. Tonight, I had